The next step in the Adirondack chair is the lower rear crosspiece. When you cut this crosspiece out, the scrap part you save, and eventually it goes here. So when we cut on the bandsaw, make sure you take the extra part, the leftover piece, and tape it to this piece and hold on to that because we're going to need it again. The first step for the lower rear crosspiece is to rough to length at 23 inches on the miter saw. Then what we're going to do, we're going to joint an edge. From there we'll move to the table saw and we'll rip to 5.5 inches. Then what we'll do is we'll square both ends. So when I say square both ends, you're just going to take a sliver cut off the end of the board. And then finally we need to finish to length to 22 inches and we'll have a square board. So just a little review here. I got my tape measure. We have to measure parallel to the edge of the board, right? We can't measure on a diagonal. Our measurement wouldn't be correct. Our board would not be the right length when we're done. So I measure parallel to the edge of the board. I'm going to put a mark at 22. Then I'm going to take my speed square. Okay, I hooked my speed square on. I hooked my speed square on. Right, there's my mark. There's my original mark. So I slide my speed square down to meet that mark. And now I trace that edge. All right, and also this is a good habit, good practice to get into. All right, I'm going to put a check mark. Okay, I put a check mark on the side of that line because when the next step we want to finish to length. So this is going to be a really accurate cut. What we want to do is we don't want to put the saw blade right on top of the line because then when we cut it, our board's going to be too short because of the kerf of the saw blade. We're going to put the saw blade next to the line. So we're going to put the saw blade right next to the line. And if this was a big long board, say a 6-foot board, and you're only cutting 3 feet off of it or something, sometimes you get confused and you forgot what side of the line that you're supposed to cut on. So that's why I put the check mark. So we're going to put the saw blade there. So the next step is finish to length at 22, and we'll do that on the miter saw. So here we are at the miter saw. I've got my board flat on the table up against the fence, and you can see my line, and you can see the check mark, and you can see when I put the saw blade down that I am next to the line. I'm not right on the line. I'm next to the line, so I'll go ahead and I'll make my cut. And when you're done, you should see a little bit of the pencil line still there. So now I know I cut that exactly at 22 inches. So now I'll say I've got a board that's all squared up. All these corners, 90-degree corner, 90-degree corner, 90, 90. If I was to tip it up here, between here and here, the edge and the face, 90 degrees. So this is all squared up. It's 22 inches long, 5.5 inches wide. Now what we're going to do is we're going to trace the profile with the template. So we're going to go ahead and we line up our template. We line it up along the long edge. The ends feel good. So I go ahead and I trace this out. So as you can see on the Adirondack chair, this board right here is on an angle. What we need to do is the curve that we just traced, we need to cut this at an angle. and that's called a bevel. So we're going to cut this at a 6-degree bevel. So here I am at the bandsaw, and you can tell the table is tipped a little bit. And if you look down here, we have like a protractor looking kind of scale, right? And I've got this already tipped to 6 degrees, right? So you always have to be careful when you're coming over and working on this green Powermatic. Depending on what you're working on, if it's the lower rear cross arm, we want it at 6 degrees. If it's at the seat, we want it to be back at 0. So see me if we need to change the table. All right, here we are at the bandsaw. We've got our piece. We've got the profile all laid out. What we have to do now is, unlike before, what I want you to do is I want you to cut exactly on the line. Okay, so now we got a little practice on the bandsaw. This one is for all the marbles here. Let's skip that. Take 2. All right, here we are at the bandsaw, and we're ready to cut that curve. Don't forget, we're going to keep this piece and we're going to keep that piece. So now what I want you to do, this time I want you to cut right on the curve, and we want to try our hardest to make a nice, neat cut. No backing up and no digging in. This is going to be kind of tricky. So here's the results. I cut right on the line. I think I did a pretty good job. A little earlier I said no backing up, but you notice that when you get to the sharp corners right here, or the tight curves, you kind of have to go forward, backward, forward, backward, forward, backward to get around that curve. All right. So what we're going to do is, again, make sure that you save both these pieces. They should always kind of be together. Right. The result here is very difficult to see, but there's a slight bevel. This is cut on an angle. Okay, so it's going to be very difficult to sand. So that's why you really need to do your best job here and see if you can get it to come out right the first time. Now to sand this, what I would recommend is just going over to the sanding table, and with the orange palm sanders, just go ahead and sand this. Just do a rough sand to 80 degrees. I'm going to tell you that all this really use the palm sander with an 80 grit sandpaper, not 80 degrees, 80 grit, and just go ahead and sand this out. These two surfaces are very, very difficult to see when the chair is finished. However, right, the tops, the faces, right, what I would do with those, rough it at 80 grit, then go to your 120, and then finally to 220, and make sure you keep these pieces together.